This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. All right, hey there everybody, and welcome back to a special New Year's episode. So unlike the normal interview format today, I want to take some time to reflect on the past year and answer some very tough and thought-provoking questions from the Discord community and explain my vision and planned projects for the year to come, or at least the ones that I can foresee from this early vantage point in the year. So it's always surprising to me how this little passion side project of a podcast has stayed relevant in my life and grown to reach so many people around the world. It started in February of 2017 when I was an apprentice to my friend and mentor, Charlie Rendal, the remarkable bamboo and natural material builder in San Marcos La Laguna in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. And since then has both followed and propelled my learning journey in my career, going on 9 years now. I'm so grateful, especially to all of you, both contributors and listeners who have supported and participated in this project for all of these years. Because of your engagement and your efforts, I've achieved so many ambitions and dreams that I could never have made come true on my own. And I genuinely hope that wherever you are and whatever holidays you celebrate, that you had a relaxing and enriching last couple of weeks with the people that you love. So with that said, let's get into the topics to kick off the year of 2025. So I want to start here with a thorough update of what I've been up to over the last year. It's been a long time since I recorded an episode talking about my own life and projects, and so much has changed since episode 280 from back in February of 2023 that was titled Reevaluating the Long-Term Key Considerations for My Context and Personal Vision of Success. In that episode, I outlined the stuff that I was working on and considering in the development of my little farm and the enterprises and personal goals around it. So I'll do my best to catch you up since then, since a lot has changed. Now, since it's one of the projects that has taken up most of my non-work time in the last couple of months, I'll start by talking about the renovations of the old house where my partner Alba and I live. So in case you didn't hear the last episode about this, we live in a registered historic building that was formerly an old mill for about 1,000 years. The first time this building appears in the registry was in the year 937, but it could honestly be older than that too. So attached to the house is a stone footbridge that was built in the same Roman period, and in previous centuries it also functioned as a hostel, not like a youth hostel, but more for people passing in between regional cities in the area, since the road that gets us here to the house has been here for a really long time and connects some of these ports of commerce. Now, since the 1920s, when the mill was decommissioned, and in 1969, when the dining hall was built into the back of the house where the mill wheel used to be, it has also been a regionally famous restaurant serving traditional Catalan food from the central mountains where we're situated. Now, needless to say, a building with this kind of history has been in need of some TLC. This year, we were able to get some local subsidies meant to maintain the towns and the land around the natural park of Las Guillerías in Sabasona, where we are. And we're putting that money towards renovating the floor that separates the old kitchen from the basement where the old mill was. The thing is, the wooden vigas, the support joists that kept the floor up, have been rotted out for a long time. And even when we bought the place, they were kind of what they call apuntalada, or held up by scaffolding. So this has been a long process, first of all, of getting the permissions and working with an architect to be able to do this. Because of its protected historical status, they don't just let you do anything by any means. And quite frankly, they don't let you do much in Spain as far as construction and regulation goes to begin with. But especially these historical buildings have a lot of regulations and limitations that you have to navigate around in order to preserve the building as it was, which quite frankly I respect. I definitely think that we should adhere to that, especially because a lot of these regulations require you to use the same natural building materials, in this case wood and stone, that was used originally in order to preserve the essence of the building, which I'm all for. But that didn't make the process any easier, and thank goodness that my partner Alba is a native Catalan speaker and could navigate all the paperwork and the permissions to get this done, or else, quite frankly, I would not have made any progress on my own. But it's been a couple of months now of, in my off hours, working to pull out all of the old debris that made up what I found out eventually was like 6 layers of flooring. So it started with the tile on the top, and then there was a thick layer of cement meant to level out the floor because it was wobbly underneath. And then there was a layer of terracotta tile, followed by another leveling layer, which was thicker than the tile itself. And in areas, they just poured sand in order to level out the place. There was another layer underneath that, and another layer under. Needless to say, I pulled out, I think, something like 25 tons of material by hand because I had to walk it through the whole house out to the backyard to put it in sacks that could be taken away. Anyway, it's been quite a journey. And actually, I think it was just a handful of days ago that I finally got down to the lower wooden layer, which was tricky in itself because it's all rotted out and you can't just walk on it or else your foot will go through and you'll end up in the basement and probably have to go to the hospital. So I've been walking basically on balance beams while pulling out these rotted planks that made up the flooring. Anyway, finally got all that material out. We're working to schedule now to bring in a specialist. We ordered the new vigas, which actually this was a really cool process because there is a local producer of chestnuts nearby. And they do everything from the chestnuts themselves to all the different wood products and different post-processed products. Like I think they have chestnut honey, and they do like trellis stakes made from chestnut posts. And yeah, they made us these beautiful vigas that met the requirements for the engineering for the new floor. And they prepared them beautifully, but it was a long process. And we finally got them. We moved them into the dining hall, so there's like no moving around in that space right now, while Alba and her dad and I work to sand those joists down and protect them with some antifungal treatments and stuff so that they last as long as possible and that I never have to do this again. This is something I want to do once and only once in my life. So yeah, soon we'll be installing those. By regulation, we have to pour a cement slab up above if we want it to meet code. So, as much as I would have loved to do it with just natural materials, that's a compromise I'm going to have to make in order to get these plans approved. And yeah, that's what's coming up for the next couple of months as I fit in travels and work and stuff in between these projects. So that's been the big one that's been happening over the last couple of months. And as soon as this wraps up, I'm really excited to start renovating the small little annex in the back of the house, which was a lot newer. I think it was put here in the early 70s, and it's not made of stone and natural materials like the other, but it's just the right size for me and Alba's residence. We do not need this large house that used to be a restaurant and a mill as our residence, especially it's just the two of us. We don't have any plans of having kids. So we're renovating this annex in the back where I'm currently speaking from a little makeshift office that I put together. And I think once we get this properly connected between the upper and the lower level and put in a little office and a workshop for me and have our bedroom and our kitchen, just the essentials, then I think we'll feel a lot more open and willing to start to operate the rest of the house as a business. Now, that's still going to need a lot of renovations. That's not going to go away. But we will have the necessary privacy and security and separation from the rest of the home that I think we're going to feel a lot more comfortable allowing strangers in and feeling like all our stuff is not scattered throughout the rest of the building. Now, as I get into all of this, and fortunately I have experience with a lot of construction projects and a lot of natural building, I'm going through the considerations of things like insulation and central heating. I think I'm going to be running a workshop to install a rocket mass heater in the center and the basement of the new annex or the little apartment that we're going to renovate. I am designing right now the water and the electricity systems in order to bring in some redundancy so that, if for whatever reason we lose electricity, which actually happens fairly often around here because we're in a very small rural area, that we'll still be able to do essential things, right? Like cook, so that it won't just be electrical appliances and we can still carry on with our lives fairly comfortably even without electricity. And also recycle wastewater out into the gardens and reuse it as many times, especially in biological applications, before it is lost, probably eventually to groundwater and then to the river that is right next to the house. And during all of this, I'm trying to keep basic functions of the farm and some development of the outdoor infrastructure going. It's not going to be a high priority to put in things like an outdoor kitchen as part of the business or to really pimp out the animal structures. We've got ducks and chickens right now. And right now I'm mostly moving them around in little movable pens to keep them on fresh ground and to keep them healthy. But I do eventually want to build out from one of the old trout ponds, which is part of the property. That's almost a whole nother story in of itself. There's 3 of them. They look like massive pools. And I currently have the chickens in the trout ponds in a deep litter system. It works really well, but it's very strange to have chickens in a trout pool. And there's a 3rd pool down below, which I'm hoping to build out as kind of an aviary with netting over the top so that birds of prey can't get in there, or foxes, which have definitely taken some of our chickens in the past, can't get in there. And that would be the area where I can curate or kind of manage the breeding of landrace varieties or improved genetics of the types of birds that I want to use for cultivation and for meat and for eggs. And also to cycle nutrients, of course, on the place and reuse the manure as a fertility system for gardens and other applications. So the design for that is starting to come along, but I can't make it a priority project in at least the next couple of months. So we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, we have another subsidy to start to put out some fencing around the fincas, around the land base around here. That's a bit of a challenge because the land is very skinny and long, so we have to use a lot more fencing than if it were more compact and more centralized. But hey, that's just what it is. Honestly, right now, the fencing is more for keeping people out so that I can confidently put my animals out in those spaces, because right now there's no real indication that the land is being curated or managed, because it doesn't look like a tilled field, which is what people associate with managed farmland around here. And so people just walk through there, and I found trash constantly. The other day we pulled out 9 champagne bottles that were like half buried nearby the river. We've pulled out, all kinds of garbage. And so anyway, we kind of need to manage access to that. As much as I don't like putting up fencing and I don't like investing in that right now, especially because we have individual fencing for the animals, it's really not about them. We're using the access to this subsidy in order to just kind of gain a little bit of control and manage the spaces a little bit better so that they don't become contaminated the way that we found them when we moved here. So that's fencing. We've also got river projects coming up. I finally got approved a proposal that I was invited to put out by the forestry technicians of the park that I mentioned previously, Las Guillerías y Sabasona. The technicians there are wonderful. I have a great relationship with them. They're doing phenomenal work in curating and stewarding the land in the park. And they have jurisdiction over this section of the river that includes our farm. And they get money from the Catalan Water Association each 4-year cycle to do projects and manage things there. And I had talked to them about some of the ideas that I had and some of the experience that I have working with water in the past. And so they invited me to put forward this proposal, which was eventually accepted and even got the budget approved. So I'm going to be organizing some induced meandering and shallow terracing with the long-term goal of reconnecting this fairly channelized stream to its original floodplain, which includes some of the plains and some of the pastures around our area. Now, it hasn't been channelized for so long, so luckily there's not residences being built in the floodplain. And even if we eventually get the water level back to where it was historically, I don't believe it's going to cause any massive or notable risk for the residences around here. There's quite frankly almost nobody that lives down in the floodplain for at least a handful of kilometers back up. So anyway, that's one of the bigger projects that I'm doing. That'll be happening up in the summer, and definitely stay tuned to this show because I will be announcing some workshops that I will be running along with some collaborators in order to teach what we're doing and show how you can do this in your own waterways wherever you might live. I also had a question about how I'm managing the steep forest plot, which is about 1 hectare and is a south-facing, very, very steep grade on the side of a mountain that's just up from our neighbor's house. Which, I can see it from my house. It's not far away. And because it's so steep and all it really is kind of forested, rocky land, I honestly have not done anything with that yet. The plan there, at least in the short term, so I'm saying like maybe within the next 1 or 2 years, is to cut little trails and switchbacks in there, so at least I can gain access or at least easier movement in between that area, because quite frankly, I haven't even explored most of it just because of how steep and difficult to navigate it is. So yeah, cutting in access and trails and stuff is the first thing. And once I get a better understanding and a read of that landscape, I'm sure I'm never going to cultivate it because of that challenging slope, but maybe some forestry management and some replanting or some erosion control might be in that future, but it's very low priority for now. And the vision for the farm in the future really centers around research. Because we're only 3 hectares, I don't expect to go into any real production. The only thing that might be feasible would be some small, let's say, egg-laying operation. I think it would even be a little bit challenging for broiler hens. And of course, a market garden. And none of these really inspire me to the point of wanting to put in the amount of time and energy that would be required to make them profitable and really productive. But I do believe that I can manage them to a point where I can run experiments and gather information, especially to help to inform other people in this unique little cold microclimate in the pre-littoral mountains between the coast and the Pyrenees, where we are situated in Catalonia. Because it gets so cold and there are major temperature swings, for example, it was -8 Celsius this morning, and there's a good chance we're going to get to somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees during the day as it gets sunny. You know, that is a unique challenge in a semi-Mediterranean Atlantic climate where people a little bit lower down from us in the mountains, or including even higher up from us, can grow things like pomegranates, and down by the coast even citrus. So, you know, there's a lot of variation in a small area, and learning how to manage the microclimate and the unique kind of granitic sandy soils that I have here is going to be focused more on landrace breeding of plants and animals that do well under these circumstances, and gathering data for how to best manage the challenges that we face. So that's kind of the longer term goal of where I'm moving towards. And I already have the beginning of the tree nursery set up. I'm already starting to take some very small custom pre-orders for trees for next season. And I'll maybe make another episode exactly about how I'm running that. I am collaborating with some people that have way more experience in managing nurseries than I do, and it's been invaluable to have their input and their advice in this process. And I'm just starting slow because I know it's not something that I can put most of my energies in while I'm doing the renovations for the house and continuing work and projects for clients and stuff, and you know, everything that I do for climate farmers. So that goes on the back burner for the moment. And in the meantime, I am also getting some educational activities started. Some of them are going to be related, like I said, to the river project that I mentioned a second ago. Some of them are going to be related to other water restoration projects that me and my team are doing on other sites that are projected for the rest of this year. And there's also opportunities to run some smaller workshops around here in the community, but I'll talk more about those when there's something actually scheduled and on the books. And ultimately, I'm sure that this sounds from an outside perspective like, oh my God, dude, like that's so much work. How do you find the time? What do you do? I get this feedback all the time from people in the community, and then it's like, do you have time to rest? And, I do. I don't really take weekends, but sometimes when there's an opportunity, when I don't have an urgent obligation or there's a little moment that isn't pulling on my time, my partner and I will, go out for lunch, and it'll draw out for a couple of hours, which is not uncommon in the culture here. Sometimes we'll just give up in the evening and stop and watch a movie or just read some books. Or lately we've been getting into online courses. Some of them are around managing ducks and chickens as we learn more about that. And there's a lot of little opportunities to relax and just enjoy and slow down the pace in between all of these things that we're doing, even though it's rare for us to actually take a full day off. But honestly, for me, it's just about embracing this idea of having lifelong projects and a very dynamic lifestyle that centers around the stewardship of this place that we're managing right now. It's something that I used to think of in terms of balancing work-life balance kind of thing, and I gave up on that a while ago There's no real separation of tasks. They all blend together. And honestly, it's something that I aspire to do more, where my work is very relevant to what I'm building in my life, and my actions in my community inform processes that I do in my work and vice versa, and how I can integrate my quality time with my family, both my partner and my family that lives in the States and her family that lives close by, and just kind of mix all of these things together. It makes it more fun. It makes it more meaningful for me. I get to share this journey with other people, at least those who want to be involved in it. And that's really shaped my thinking on this process in general. And that brings me back to the core of why my partner Alba and I are doing all of this. We very early on created a holistic context for this project that is helping us to guide our design decisions and the development projects that we're doing. And it all centers around family. I come from a pretty big family. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and all of us live in different parts of the world. Most of them are kind of scattered around the United States. My sister is in Kuwait. Alba is the youngest of 2 children and is very close with her brother and her parents. Her parents come here pretty much every Sunday and help us work on projects. We have a really great relationship with them. I also feel very close to them. And because my immediate family lives far away, now that we have space, it's so important for me to carve out time throughout the year for them to be able to visit and enjoy what we're building here and offer some learning and connection to nature that, they don't always have access to where they live, especially in the case of my sister and her kids. And like I said, that's also informing the way that we're renovating the house. So instead of having all these little individual rooms that were part of the hostel originally, I am reforming them into little kind of ensuite units that can in the future be rented out, but just as importantly, when family comes to visit, they can stay for long periods of time and have enough privacy and autonomy that they feel comfortable having extended stays, or even the possibility, as Alba's folks get older and mine do as well, of retiring here and having their own space where they can live the way that they want and enjoy the shared space, but also be close enough that we can care for them as they get older and need assistance. So that's really what is informing how I develop this place and the farm model that goes along with it. So with that update out of the way, I want to answer some of the questions that I posed to the Discord community just a handful of days ago. And I was actually kind of taken aback. I almost was worried that I had jumped too quickly to ask questions to the community, because the ones that came up are pretty deep. And it took me some time to think about this and kind of carefully answer them in a way. And I wrote this down, so it's not going to sound quite as fluid as the description of the update of the projects, because I really want to be careful with my words. The concepts that were provoked here are worth it for me to really answer in a careful and a strategic way, because I care deeply about the way that I process this idea and this information. And so, here goes. So the first question is, are we at a turning point in terms of the paradigm of regeneration? And where are we headed? All right, so I'll do my best with this one. I don't believe that we're at a turning point yet, nor that we're going to get there through government initiatives and promoting solutions. We're headed for the collapse of globalism and this concept of abundant energy that we've enjoyed my entire life, and certainly before then too. Definitely the collapse of the digital space, which is dependent on that energy source, and this illusion of disconnection that goes along with these technologies and the energy sources as well. So that's where I see the silver lining in that. I don't believe that collapse needs to be catastrophic or even negative in the long term. Of course, there's going to be some inevitable adjustments, and how devastating or difficult those are, I believe, are still within our hands to determine. And similarly, what the collapse looks like, I think, is where we actually have still some opportunity to change things. Now, I really want to be careful when I talk about collapse, because there are so many associations with it, and I believe the way that it's regularly talked about, at least in the social media sphere, is it is the complete collapse of everything that we know and destruction of the world as we know it. That's not what I'm talking about when I refer to collapse, and I will recommend a fantastic book called The 5 Stages of Collapse by Dmitry Orlov, which really helped me to get a better understanding of this both in terms of the fact that collapse has happened many, many times throughout our history and is currently happening in different parts of the world even as we speak, and that it doesn't mean only a complete collapse and devastation of our world, but that these different stages of collapse can not only be anticipated, but also managed so that they don't regress or evolve into more severe forms of collapse. And if collapse is a concept that causes you a lot of anxiety or fear or other negative emotions, I would really recommend that you check out that book. It helped me to get a more practical and logical understanding of it, and some ideas about how it might be navigated and mitigated so that it doesn't become this complete devastation that many people associate with it. So yeah, 5 Stages of Collapse, Dmitry Orlov, highly recommended. Next question is, share your thoughts on the broader context of regeneration, drawing from podcast learnings and your own experience. All right, so I believe that regeneration, like all other terms, is being diluted to the point of uselessness. Now, I continue to use it because of what the dictionary definition of the word inspires in me, and not the way that it's used in catchy YouTube and social media titles promising solutions for climate change and how to solve biodiversity loss or technologies that will save the planet. That's not what I'm talking about. To use an example, one of the reasons why I'm not more active on platforms like LinkedIn is that I observe that it's become a competition between people to signal to the audience there that one's work and efforts and focus are more dignified and effective and informed than other people in the space. I see this even from people that I agree with. Many of you know that water cycle restoration and landscape rehydration have become a focus of my work for years now. And yet, I feel saddened to see that many of my peers are belittling others who have focused on carbon capture projects or tree planting projects as misinformed and behind the times. The tone of so many posts and articles are heavy with condescension about the poorly informed farmers and land managers or business owners who are destroying the planet or promoting pseudo-solutions from the writer's point of view. I myself feel the seduction and the lure of being right and doing better than those around me. How could I not? I was raised in the pious Judeo-Christian culture as the child of Christian missionaries in Japan. I recognize the same feelings of self-righteous superiority of knowing without a doubt that I knew the one true God and should spread the gospel of His word to the poor and the unwitting masses who were otherwise doomed. Only now it's a sermon of the infallibility of water restoration to the misguided carbon sequestration enthusiasts who, if only they could see the light, they might change their ways and invest their fiat currency in my superior cause. I could replace water restoration or carbon drawdown for building soil and precision agriculture, or indigenous worldviews and the evils of capitalism. The point is that regardless of what banner you raise in the illusionary fight against your definition of other, the mentality and reduction to tribal seclusion seems to seep into all of it. All of these terms and identities are as fictional as the entities and the currencies that back them. And yet all the data that we have, and even the statistics that we manipulate, seem to indicate that not only is the trajectory of degradation that we're on continuing, but it's also accelerating. The hyperbole and the hubris of every climate change solution and world-saving technology scrambles to hide their full cost of operation, and the blind spots in their calculations claiming to have finally cracked the case. All of this while the last remaining examples of human cultures and community configurations that have demonstrated for millennia their ability to live in balance with their natural surroundings are exterminated or assimilated into the global machine of bottomless consumption. So I'll stop short of naive nostalgia for a mythical past in which native peoples walked the earth in harmony with every living being and floated through their spiritually enlightened existence without a trace of violence or waste. Those ideas are not only disproven, but they hide racist assumptions of noble primitive peoples and overlook truly horrific cultural practices of abuse and oppression that have existed both in the past in those cultures and in the present of human communities all around the world, even among those who appear to exemplify ecological stewardship. It would seem that this human experiment has been and will always be a work in progress, and that everyone's efforts to improve the way that we live and interact and consume and contribute represent our best attempt based on the knowledge, the awareness, the ability, and the limited foresight that any of us have at the given moment. Now, that being said, we live in a world that is grappling with the consequences of those exact efforts from the generations before us. And I'm sure that generations from now, people will be cursing the messages and the initiatives that we today are convinced are the salvation of the future. So for reference, let's look at eugenics or heroin-based cough syrup, and a list of terms and phrases that were considered politically correct just 50 years ago, but will get you canceled if they get dug up from your Twitter feed from just a few years ago. And I can imagine any of you listening to this now could think of a list off the top of your head of things that are currently normal and either accepted or actively incentivized that could easily become illegal or taboo in a couple of decades. But that's what goes along with the irresponsibly powerful technologies that we find commonplace now and the increasingly accelerating rate of progress and development that I know I can't keep up with. One of the common follies that I observe in a lot of intelligent and exciting regenerative initiatives that I see, and there are many of them, some which have already closed their doors, some which are still going, some are just getting started, and some that I've participated in and others that I've only heard of, is that they mostly all seem to work as long as there's funding, and they dissolve the moment that the money goes away. Now, I don't mean to criticize this by saying that they should soldier on as volunteers and struggle as activists without being able to pay their bills. But it does seem to demonstrate that there's not a lot of skin in the game. It's normal as well if your initiative is committed to some abstract concept of saviorism on a scale that is functionally invisible. For example, solving climate change or saving the planet or ending food waste or solving biodiversity loss, all of these kind of abstract concepts. I mean, what does that even look like in someone's day-to-day life? How does the way that you live and operate change in these utopias? Especially if the more urgently tangible problems that you live with revolve around something like domestic violence or racial discrimination or political oppression. Will those go away when we get carbon concentrations in the atmosphere below 300 parts per million or restore your local wetland? I don't know. At this point, I want to step back though and check myself, because I'm already at risk of slipping into the same self-righteous superiority with this long list of critiques. But here's the truth. I am just as guilty, if not more, than anyone that I would deride for crimes of ecological destruction and careless consumption or oversimplified solution seeking. I spent my late teens and most of my 20s working for many of the most destructive and wasteful industries in existence. Part of my job as a marine engineer on international carrier vessels was to toss our trash out the stern the moment we hit international waters. I've been silently complicit as the officers of a fish processing vessel that I worked on in Alaska covered up a minor oil spill that was 100% our fault of negligence. I've operated machinery on a fish cannery that funneled millions of wild salmon through conveyor belts and holding tanks to processing factories that would make the fish equivalent of Auschwitz pale in comparison. Are they no less worthy of life than humans? I've labored on industrial vineyards in the southern Australian desert that only existed because they paid millions annually to siphon off a dying river for their irrigation. I've tossed tons of perfectly reusable construction materials from demolition projects into the tip on remodeling jobs. I've traveled the world on the unparalleled privilege of 2 passports that open entry to the maximum possible number of countries without a visa, while the local workers on my natural building projects were barred from visa acceptance to places that I enter without even an application. I've gotten a first-hand look at the disregard for human and ecological suffering behind the global industries that huge sections of the world economy depend on. And I took a profit from my participation. I was, after all, just doing my job. Now, though I might never have been the CEO or the boss making the decisions on any of these operations, I am still the very ecological criminal that any and everyone can point to as the embodiment of white, male, cisgendered, privileged, consumptive, and at times entitled villainy. That's me. And because of that, I don't judge anybody for participating in the wholesale destruction of the world around us with the justification that they just need to pay their bills, or support their family, or make ends meet, while hating the systems that we feel trapped in. I know exactly what that feels like. The truth is that despite my egregious culpability, I really want to contribute to rebirth. I want my limited time in this life to support radical change for the better, to restore to original strength or properties of the living world, as per my elaboration on the Merriam-Webster definition of regenerate. I now have the incredible good fortune to be able to choose what I do for work and invest in building skills and experience that can contribute more effectively to a world that I want to live and participate in. And my work is something that I derive joy and satisfaction from now. That being said, I still don't do all that I could. I haven't taken the time to learn how to do many of the things that I believe to be essential elements of a regenerative lifestyle, like taking care of sick and injured people, or promoting and managing structures of inclusive governance, or uniting and mobilizing groups of people for the work that I advocate for. I may or may not ever delve into these aspects, but they're no less essential to this concept of regeneration that I believe in. I say all of this just to be honest about who I am and how I got here, and how despite my critique and aversion to aspects of the regenerative sector that I consider myself a part of, I'm no better than anyone else who is overwhelmed or depressed by the aspects of living in the modern world that forces us all to participate by default in the wretched and criminal structures that make our economy and our supply structures function. To use my earlier religious analogy, we're all born into this original sin. So to go back to the original question, that's how I feel about the context in which the regenerative movement operates. And it's also why I don't yet believe that we've hit a tipping point, either in consciousness nor in progress. I still see clearly the patterns and the paradigms that have corroded previous noble-seeming efforts at the heart of our ecological endeavors and our savior complexes, and yet I'm trying to do my best to address the manifestations of these patterns in myself. I've slipped many times into despair, wrestling with the weight of what I observe and a seemingly impossible goal of changing course, certainly within the time urgency that we face. I personally have arrived at an understanding that I can neither change nor really affect the decisions of others, much less the actions of the hegemonic entities. I personally have arrived at an understanding that I can neither change nor really affect the decisions of others, much less the actions of hegemonic entities that have an outsized say in what happens in the world around me. But I can take personal agency for the things that I do. The way that I contribute and interact with the living beings that I come into contact with, and that cultivating the personal discipline and temperance needed to live in a way that rejects the apathy and the complacency that I've let consume me in the past, well, I sleep better at night. And I'm not good at this stuff yet, but I am doing a lot better now than a decade ago. And I see the fruits of my efforts in the reputation that I've built with clients and collaborators. And a larger part of my mental space is occupied with concerns for others than for myself. For now, that's how I'm gauging progress. Now, in terms of my experience from this podcast, I'm so inspired and nourished by the examples of the people that I've interviewed in terms of their tenacity and dedication to bringing light and health and abundance to those around them. So many of them do what they do outside of their working life or as a side gig. They find the energy to lift others up and restore hope and potential to the forms of life that others disregard and ignore. Sometimes this is human, sometimes this is plants or animals. They take time to listen and observe what others overlook and use those insights to build lasting relationships and connections that are more tangibly regenerative than any VC-funded climate startup that I've ever heard of. And I've been tapped a few times to evaluate startups for grant funding, so I have a sense of what's out there. So to wrap up this embarrassingly personal rant, which probably goes way outside of the intent of the question, the broader context of regeneration which I observe is that the term, as far as popular association and buzzword value, is looking like it might become functionally useless, the way that sustainable or green or all natural has become very soon. To me, regeneration is not the flashy events that end up in group photos and new profile pictures, which I've both participated in and hosted, but the small acts of kindness and care and lifetimes of stewardship and loving dedication, whether that be the mundane but essential maintenance of a reforestation project that helps it survive, taking the time out of your weekend to care for your disabled neighbor, or just taking care of your health so that you can keep your family afloat as you weather harder times than maybe you've ever anticipated. All of those acts can only come from a sense of relationship and connectedness to the web of life that we are not separate from, and that our contemporary digital and monetized world has worked so hard to erode. That is the definition of regeneration that I refer to when I use the term. The kind that will never get you a statue in a town square or a Netflix documentary or sometimes even a thank you. I'm worried that the race to be a climate hero or the face of a regreening project takes away our time to be present and truly participate in the small and the consistent acts that actually regenerate our immediate and tangible world. That's the definition of regeneration that I aspire to embody as I go through my day and engage in work and other projects. That's the hope that I see when anticipating the collapse of our conveniences and supply chains and omnipresent distractions. That's the concept that I'm doubling down on as another COP conference wraps up from a petroleum-sponsored host nation. That's the energy that keeps me using the term as I watch it get attached to another disposable consumer product. And those are the skills that I refer to in the title of this show. All right, let's get to one more question here. This one is tricky, but it really caused me to think about this more carefully and reduce this down to actionable stuff. So here goes. What are the priority things that I've observed in the projects that I visited that outperform expectations? So I'll break this down into 3 things. Number 1, water collection and reuse features. So though we are carbon-based life forms, I would make the analogy that carbon is the scaffolding or the shell of our biology, but water is the animating element. Water is necessary for every known process of life: growth, reproduction, decomposition, etc. We are more than 60% water, but if you look closer at the cellular level, we find that cells are upwards of 90% water. For me, then, it makes sense that the more water you can collect and distribute throughout both space and time, moistening dry periods and rehydrating dry spots, the higher capacity for life in diversity, quantity, and quality you will enable in return. Number 2, connected and engaged community. So we all have limitations, and it's unrealistic to think that we can overcome them by working harder or studying and learning skills beyond what we currently have. There's always going to be a limit to what we can learn and do ourselves. Our success as a species, and one of the core differences that we have from other species that we know of, is our ability to connect and to collaborate. In fact, the only aspect that I believe that I'm really going to miss about modern technology when it goes away is the ability to communicate effortlessly across the world in real time. But even before these tools were available, our ability to articulate complex and abstract ideas and belief systems is at the root of every remarkable achievement and cultural phenomenon from the beginning of our history. The projects that I truly admire are the ones that are catalyzing coordination and collaboration both within the projects on the land that they manage and within the broader communities that they're part of. They don't hoard resources and success. They leverage the abundance that they build to share opportunity and include others in their trajectory. They also benefit immensely in return, as even with AI-enabled robotic inventions, there is no close competition for the potential of a careful and caring human hand in stewardship of the land. Even if AI could embody the emergent properties of learning and creativity inspired by ideas and experience that our species is capable of, it could never subsist on the relatively meager vegetative and animal calories that fuel us. In the best possible case, it's a useful tool to accelerate our journey towards a better understanding and symbiosis with the living world around us. More likely, though, it's a corrosive distraction that further separates us from our intellectual and creative capacities in a time when our senses and intuition have already been atrophied from disuse and a lack of appreciation. Number 3. The careful combination of stacked and interwoven elements. The mark of any robust and healthy environment is the presence and interconnection of a broad number and diversity of life forms and their functions in behavior and material transformation that they each perform as natural processes in their lifespans. Degradation of a biome can happen in two ways. First, when life forms are eradicated from a space. I don't mean the natural cycle of death or population fluctuation and rebirth, but complete removal. The second is when the connections between these life forms are severed. This can happen when barriers separate interactions such as migration patterns or modes of communication or the transfer of nutrients and other materials through the food web. It can also happen when contaminants are introduced that disrupt interconnection. Think about when an animal eats plastics or other chemicals that inhibit digestion, fermentation, or other decomposition. Or perhaps toxic concentrations of synthetic aerosols that prevent the formation of cloud condensation and natural precipitation cycles. The interconnection of the highly complex systems and cycles in our living world are just as important as any individual species or element. Now, all of these examples are kind of theoretical though, so I'll give an example from an actual land-based project that illustrates what I'm talking about. Now, some of you may have seen the short 15-minute documentary that I made with my friend Holden just before leaving Guatemala in 2019. It's titled Quixaya, Heart of Water, and I did my best to highlight the inspiring story of the indigenous Mayan community that has been such a source of inspiration to me up to this day. Now, though you can find the video easily on Regenerative Skills YouTube channel, I'll summarize my main takeaways from the project. So this community inherited a few kilometers of land bordering their river after the former plantation owner went bankrupt. They set to work equally distributing the land among the families in their population, and together transformed the plantation into a wildly diverse ecological oasis of perennial agriculture and low-input annual cash crops. They channel water through terraces and pools and irrigation channels all throughout their land base, and it's honestly the most beautiful farmed environment that I've ever seen in all of my travels. And key to the results that they've achieved is a community structure that governs collective decision-making while preserving the autonomy of the individual plots that each family has. The success of the farm model is equally related to the solidarity and the cooperation of the residents as it is to the natural abundance and wealth of water that feeds their collective work. As you'll see in the video, the community is not without its challenges and difficulties. Waste management, or lack of it, threatens to pollute the space that they care for. Farm produce, no matter how high a quality, creates really little income, and poverty and a lack of job opportunities leads to residents to migrate to cities and even consider the dangerous journey to the US. But still, it's the example that best illustrates the concepts that I just mentioned and continues to inspire me as I envision and design my own farm along the little river that passes through my property. Here's another question. What do you think will be the biggest challenges in the year ahead for your projects, your family, and the wider world? All right, I'll try and tackle those in the order that they were given. So my biggest challenge is cultivating a different mindset from the one that got me here. Instead of the constant hustle of taking on as much paid work as I can fit into a day and saving everything at the expense of my personal health and my rest, how do I adopt a mindset of slow, steady, and consistent maintenance and care of the things that I share with my partner, not the least of which is our relationship, of co-creating the potential and the vision that I see for this space that I care for, and being humble enough to let go of my own expectations and make time to observe and learn from the natural world around me, as well as the shifting realities of the world and the community around me and their needs as well. At the same time, remaining rooted in the fundamentals of high-quality existence as shiny temptations and attractive distractions come in and out of my field of view. That's something that I've known since I moved here. That level of hustle, which quite frankly was necessary for us to save the money and to get this project started, is not the same mentality that is going to help me to care for it and to enjoy the journey. Now, I know this is all kind of abstract and esoteric, so I'll give some examples. So for this podcast, it means admitting that I need help. That keeping up with a weekly show that takes between 5 and 8 hours a week to produce is not something that I can always carve out of all the competing demands on my time. I'll talk about what this is going to look like for the upcoming season in just a minute. But for the farm, it means that I just have to accept that the garden is going to be messy and that I can't be as attentive to the animals as I would like while the heavy lifting of the house renovations take most of my time and definitely my savings while I'm at home. And I'm still committed to producing a little more of the food that we consume each year, but that I'm not failing if that's not the majority of my calories yet, and that I won't start selling more than just a few simple products this year. I do, however, hope to make a bigger effort at building community connections and fostering collaboration with my neighbors than I have in the last year. I know that those relationships have way more to do with our own resilience than producing vegetables and eggs in both the long and the short term. So for my family, it's tougher to say. Alba and I are on the same page about most of this stuff, and it's definitely not my place to talk to strangers on the internet about the challenges that she's working on personally. But one thing that we're actively planning time for is showing appreciation for her parents, who come to help us on house and farm projects every Sunday like clockwork. We took them to Porto, Portugal for a holiday last year, and I think that this year we'll plan a road trip through the north of Spain to Salamanca, where her dad grew up. And aside from that, just spending as much quality time together as always is what we aim for. And the same with the rest of my family that's scattered around the world. I'm hoping that my two brothers, who haven't been to Spain yet, can visit us for the first time this summer. And we'll get at least one full month with my sister and the Beans as well. The Beans being, of course, my nieces. For the wider world, now I'm certainly in no place to comment on that, but if I had to say something, I think we could all benefit from making an effort to see ourselves in others and empathize with the people that we see as bad or the opposition or different from us, however we might define that. But I have to get a lot better at that myself before I can talk about what that actually entails. So there it is, the super simple and light questions that my friends on the Discord community put to me. I hope that I didn't veer too far from the intention of the questions originally, and I do hope to get some feedback and insights on these questions from the members in the weeks to come, and that it sparks some more discussion. I know that many of them have already thought through this much more than I have, so I'm looking forward to interacting with them there. Now, to wrap this up, I want to give a preview of the next season that is going to be starting in February. So what do all of these reflections and these updates mean for the show in the coming season? Well, I've known for a while that I'm going to need some assistance, and so I've been putting it out to the Discord community that I want to develop mini-series of episodes in partnership with community members. Now, though I'll be taking time to develop these over the month of January, I can tell you about a few that are in the works. So one that I'm really excited about is an exploration of regenerative projects and opportunities from areas of the world that we normally consider to be of lower income and scarce access to resources. Now, though I've recorded plenty of episodes from people working in these areas in the past, and until I moved to Spain, almost all of my own experience came from places like Guatemala and Senegal, the Philippines, Ecuador, and such. The idea is to understand how people find solutions and advance their dreams when they can't just order tools and materials on Amazon, when there's no source of straw or wood chips for mulch, and no one has money to buy plants from nurseries or get free LiDAR maps from a government website. Now, another one that I've already scheduled some interviews on is the concept of regenerative tourism. I'm collaborating with an expert in this area to go beyond sustainable tourism and the do less harm paradigm, often masked as regenerative, and I'm really new to this idea, so I'm looking forward to expanding my own understanding through this process. I'll also be doing a deep dive in high-quality agronomy and the science and the practices that represent realistic results and concepts that go beyond the popular food forest and permaculture diverse gardens of Eden fantasies that lots of non-farmers promote as panacea solutions on social media, but that farmers can rarely connect with. I manage the Climate Farmers community, and the conversations in our groups reflect a feeling of massive disconnect between amateur enthusiasts in the agri-food regeneration space and the challenges and the realities of farmers, even those who are actively pursuing regeneration. Now, I'm teaming up with a good friend and experienced farmer and veterinarian to build this series, so I know it's going to be of high quality. Another mini-series that's in the early stages is that of land access challenges and opportunities around the world. We're thinking of looking at both conventional and unconventional paths to land access, as well as concepts like reestablishing the commons, cooperative ownership, and chipping away at the structures that have turned land into a financial commodity. Lastly, of course, I'll be exploring water cycle regeneration and practical skills and knowledge for water retention in different contexts. Now, though I'm sure I'll be bringing in some experts for a few of the interviews, I'm also super excited to bring you listeners out into the field with me and the team that I work with on some incredibly ambitious water-focused jobs that we already have planned for this upcoming year. Now, I don't want to give too much away because I already have some conversations planned with the team to fully outline these projects, our design approach, and the timeline and the collaboration opportunities that will go along with them. But I can say that if you've listened to and enjoyed some previous episodes where I've journaled the water retention landscape jobs that I've done in places like Nicaragua and Portugal, then you're in for a treat. In the coming months, we'll be working on farms, multiple river and riparian zone restoration initiatives, and even my own advancing design for the farm, the house and the river that runs through the property. All of this stuff is going to make it onto the show pretty soon. And lastly, I've been talking with my friends at New Society Publishers about some of the new titles that they've recently released and have coming out during the year. Titles like Wild Plant Culture, The Seed Farmer, The Rise of Indigenous Economic Power, Micro Farms, The Secret Life of Your Microbiome, and a whole bunch more. So if you want to get ahead of me, you should definitely check out their full catalog at newsociety.com, because even after almost a decade of sending me books and sponsoring the show, I'm still blown away by the quality of authors and writing that they consistently put out year after year, and would recommend their catalog and interview their authors, even if I didn't have such a close relationship with their team. So one last thing along the lines of the things to expect from this show before we wrap it up with this episode. In line with what I was talking about in my previous rant about the state of the environmental and regenerative sector, I want to double down on the enriching conversations and relationships of support that are being built on the Discord community for this show. We're now over 500 members strong, and of all the online communities that I'm a part of, these channels offer the most engagement, encouragement, support, and inspiration for people who want to share their projects and their progress and get feedback and ideas or debate complicated concepts in a respectful and courteous environment. And we've even got a channel where you can create a unique thread for your own work and develop your plans with the pros and even former guests in real time. Similarly, if you're a farmer anywhere in Europe, the Climate Farmers community has about 700 members who are there to exchange honest experiences and knowledge from the field. I regularly organize regional gatherings where we get together in real life, usually at one of our members' farms, and build connections that our members have come to rely on for the kind of support that you can only get from the people who are really trying things out in the fields every day. Some of the most innovative and well-known regen farmers in Europe are there, and we currently have channels for Spanish, Portuguese, and German speakers, along with the central one, which is in English. Now, I've long since abandoned any ambition of growing the audience of this show just to boast about the numbers. This year, I'll be putting my energy in cultivating the shared potential that we have on these channels with those of you who really want to build meaningful connections with others who are really doing the work. Forget about the likes and the reposts on social media platforms that are designed to rob your attention and build algorithms to sell you crap. This podcast Discord and the Climate Farmers community are both nonprofit projects dedicated to creating space for peer-to-peer learning and development. So come and join me there and help us to create a truly enriching and supportive online experience. It's also the best place that you can get in touch with me directly, and who knows, maybe we can collaborate on one of the series that I develop here in Season 9. So there it is. That wraps up things for my reflections for this year, an update on the craziness and all the moving pieces of my life at the moment, and a preview of the fun things to come in the podcast season and the projects that I've got on the horizon. So be sure to tune in to the launch of the new season on February 7th, and as always, keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way in 2025.